Well, today we are talking about a very important topic that I always say it's easier to get people to change their religion than change their diet. We're talking about how to nourish brains and how an anti-inflammatory diet. And no, there are many types of anti-inflammatory diets, but they're all good and they're all important. And but how can we help our kids to naturally improve their intention, calm their brain, make them be less cranky and moody? Today I, came from it's holiday season whenever you're listening to this episode or watching, and I came from my kids' school and a holiday concert. And, so everybody always wants to talk to me about, random things, but certainly things about, diet. And so one of the moms was like, where we think she has celiac and JC, doesn't have any gluten and whatnot. And I really want to talk to you. And I was like, ask me anything you want. And I was like, what's going on? What kind of symptoms? And literally she said like that she has one decent bowel movement a month. And I was like, holy cow, that's like my autistics. Like, how long has this been going on? And she was talking about how much this is impacting her mood, how difficult she is. She's a super pleasant kid. And so we kind of hashed out, what are the basics and whatnot. And I was like, I'm literally talking about, the link between diet and behavior today and how important it is and what we can do about it. Right. And, for any of people that, one of my moms flew out here today from the West Coast. She's going to be on the show at a later point because she wants to talk about how, it's all these little pieces that really make a lot of differences. And so she's in our brain behavior reset program, which is incredible. And, she was talking to me about how that she was very overwhelmed by her child's behavioral issues and wanted to hop on a plane and get out here, but was talked out of it because they were worried about her being overwhelmed. And she went to a local practitioner who it was just a terrible experience. And they just didn't have a depth of knowledge. And in fact said, I don't even believe in pans. And she still went to them because it was down the road. And anyway, she came here and she was like, my gut was always to come here. And I really want to tell people that you really need to work with people who know what they're doing in your area. And I was like, well, thank you for saying that. And of course, I got to hear about all these beautiful changes that have happened in just a few short weeks. So we always talk about natural solutions like diet and neurofeedback and all these things taking a very long time. But once the brain starts to calm, things start to happen. So we're going to talk about diet because it's important. But if you're interested in working with me one-on-one, all you have to do to go to is drroseann.com/help. It will take you to what we call a solution matcher. And no matter where you are, it's going to match you to the right solution, whether that's, a resource we have or in fact, working one-on-one with us. So drroseann.com/help. You never want to ignore problems. And I know a lot of people feel like, well, I've done diet. I've done this and I've done that. And I'm actually going to do an episode called Have You Really Done Enough? Because it's not that you haven't, it's the order, and that same mom, we had this great conversation about how much she was doing, and actually coming here helped her to streamline and work so much smarter, and just how transformative their whole family life was. And I was like, thank you. It's so nice to hear these things. And everybody wants a success story. So how does an anti-inflammatory diet improve the brain? And let's just talk about anti-inflammatory diet. Like, what are the basic components of an anti-inflammatory diet? And feel free to ask questions if you're joining live. So really, there are many types of anti-inflammatory diet. The number one most researched anti-inflammatory diet is actually a Mediterranean diet. And but the basics of a Mediterranean diet is either no or very low amounts of wheat, sugar, and dairy. Okay. And why? Why? Because everyone always like, why wheat? I'm not celiac or whatever. Here's the reason. In America, wheat has poison on it, right? It's called glyphosate. So you literally are putting poison in your body when you have American wheat. It is not the same in other countries, particularly Europe, and Australia and New Zealand, they just don't permit that kind of garbage on their stuff. There's a lot much more regulation about what contaminants and preservatives and things can be in food. Like many things in America are labeled as toxic chemicals in Europe. So my relatives would always be like, Roseann, this is a garbage. They would say to me and stuff like that. They would be like, this tastes terrible. They're just not used to the same kind of preservatives. So it is food that is more nutrient dense. And when you remove particularly dairy can be very inflammatory for a lot of people. It is for me. It is for me. And it is for Max. Like, Max has dairy and like, I can tell when he sneaks it because he's 18, because all of a sudden he gets acne. And I was like, Daddy and I had zero acne. Okay. Never. Like, you are not wired that way, and your skin is your largest organ. Go back and listen to the episode with Dr. Anna Maria Temple about eczema and the skin and magnesium. It's so jam-packed with great information. She's so smart. So that's the basics, right? And you really are focusing on getting in high quality food, right? Also this morning I had this great conversation with a Filipino mom, and I was like, hey, because she's new to the school, I said, I heard that your kid has as healthy of food as my kid does. And she was like, that's right. And it was so cute because I said, and I was like, oh, JC says there's some real good food coming from your family. She's like, I'm always cooking. And she's like, did you ever try the hot lunch? And I was like, absolutely no way. Like, and it's from an outside provider. And I was like, it's poo. Like they let the kids have pizza. I'm like, how is that brain food? Anyway, not saying you never have pizza. Dr. Roden made pizza from with cauliflower pizza shells, whatever, and a couple other gluten-free different versions on Tuesday night. There wasn't a lick left, right? We put prosciutto on it. We put vegan cheese. You can have things. You just have to put more nutrient dense foods. And my kids love it. They're not going to ever tell you that, we're not making good food. So number one, an anti-inflammatory diet, reduces inflammation. And why should we care about inflammation? Well, because kids are born with 267 toxins, and we have a huge increase in genetic variants, and these variants interfere with detoxification and with stress, with neurodevelopmental disorders. All these compounded things cause a lot of stress within the nervous system and make detoxification harder. So let's put less garbage in so the body can work more efficiently. In the same way that this mom was telling me her daughter literally gets one good poop in a month. Oh my God. Like, for those of us that have a normal functioning gut, I mean, she missed a week of school, the poor kid. So you need to have elimination, right? And we want to make sure those toxins are out of that system. Otherwise, it's going to impact you. And in that case, it was impacting her mood. Hopefully that's a ding, ding, ding aha moment for you. So anti-inflammatory diet, your brain works better, right? I think you know why. Not just reduced inflammation, but you're getting good nutrients in, right? And there's lots of great anti-inflammatory foods, right? And just know, just because you're not having sugar, like in my house, we use a lot of honey and maple syrup. So there are alternatives. But once you go anti-inflammatory, your palate changes, and the food, fruits, other things, natural sweeteners taste sweet. Right? It's funny, our magnesium, which is behind me, some people have said it's very sweet. And I know it's sweet because we seasoned it with monk fruit. And really those super, super clean eaters are like, holy cow, it's sweet. I'm like, yeah, because magnesium, I have so much magnesium in there. It's so potent. You're used to having like garbage magnesium, and they can temper that taste down, right? So ours has L-threonate, glycinate, and super bioavailable forms. If I didn't sweeten it, it would taste terrible. So it tastes really good. I've had one full refusal. Thanks for ruining my record. But everyone has their own palate, and you have to work what's best for you. But it does change. When you eat anti-inflammatory, your palate changes. So your kids who are super restrictive will become less restrictive. They really are. The path to get there ain't easy. I'm not going to lie. Right. So we know that an anti-inflammatory diet is associated with better mood, less anxiety, tons of research. You can grab my book, and there's great blogs on it. We know that an anti-inflammatory diet improves neuroplasticity in the brain. And that isn't just for our neurodivergence, but it's also for us, like moms that are going through perimenopause and menopause, or just even really having vitality in their brain. When I get families to change to an anti-inflammatory diet, I mean, they're like, wow. I mean, I'm thinking so much better. There's just so much. And that improved neuroplasticity reduces our risk of brain diseases. So we know actually that some of the countries that have the greatest rates of longevity, they are eating a Mediterranean diet. They are Japan too. They're eating a very high level of anti-inflammatory foods, and they're just so with it. I'm always amazed. Like my dad, Tony, he was over last night. He's like, it's a good thing you called me, Rose, because right after you called me, somebody else invited me over, and he's just a hot ticket. Like there's so sharp, physically and mentally, and is only in anti-inflammatory foods, except he does have Stella D'Or cookies. I'm not gonna lie. I try to stop that, but everything else he eats really great. So it's important. And that's, that we want that brain health, not just for today, for the future as well. And that when you are using psychiatric medications, they are associated with a greater rate of cognitive diseases later in life. I don't want to freak you out, but this is why we're having this conversation, so that you're like, wow, these ADD meds, which shrink the frontal lobes, shrinking your frontal lobes is the opposite of what we want. Having an anti-inflammatory diet is going to support brain health. It's going to help that brain communication is neuroplasticity. So improve sleep. No, we all need better sleep, right? Dr. Rose had 2 great nights of sleep. I mean, just the way you can think and take action is just totally different. Your stress levels are different. And back to detoxification and reducing inflammation, 90% of brain detoxification occurs at sleep, 90%. So many of our neurodivergents are not getting enough sleep. And many of us perimenopausal and menopausal women are not getting enough sleep. Anti-inflammatory diet, so you're not eating junk. Of course, your blood sugar is much more regulated. And we don't talk enough about blood sugar. So blood sugar is absolutely tied to mental health. I mean, a lot of times when I work with people in our brain behavior reset program, and I'm really able to get so deep into things that are happening in a family or a child's life, or even an adult, is, we start to look at what are the cycles, right? Is there something that's happening, right? Because we're going to take a 360 aerial view. We're going to be a detective. We're going to look at what are the antecedents, what are the things that are the triggers. So when we do that in one-to-one, right, I start to look at, well, is there a repetitive pattern, right? Does this happen after meals? Does this happen around menstrual cycles? And blood sugar can affect, of course, both of these things. And so sometimes our kids might be wired in a certain way, and there's really an exacerbation around puberty. And it really may not be, I mean, even John Carlo, I mean, he gave me a hard time today, but that's just normal puberty stuff, right? Developmental. But when it's happening a lot, that's when we have to worry. That's why you're listening, right? So we want to think about things like blood sugar, right? So an anti-inflammatory diet reduces oxidative stress, right? So that's just stress that is happening because you're not getting enough antioxidants. And that's going to have a physical and a brain effect. So one of the things that I love about an anti-inflammatory diet is it really promotes good gut health and great bacteria. And why is that so important? Why is it that, you're seeing it on TV? Why are you hearing so much, right? So we have a connection between our brain and our gut. It's actually connected to something called the vagus nerve. And think of it as sort of like that super highway, and it has a bidirectional back and forth influence. And our gut produces many types of neurotransmitters, but 95% is of serotonin, which is required for mood and focus, is produced exclusively in the gut. So if we are not nourishing our gut, we are eating what's the number one food in America, people? French fries is actually the number one food in America. I looked that up. We had a little, trivia thing in our house. And there actually was some good stuff on there. Like steak was on there too. Steak and potatoes was in the top 10 as well. But number one food in America is French fries. And listen, my bestie Shelly, who, if you happen to be watching, Shelly, my godson was born today. I don't even want to get started. I'm going to start to cry. So Harvey was born today. We love potatoes. We joke all the time about potatoes, but there's healthy ways to do it, and you can get better options, right? Don't get McDonald's. But good anti-inflammatory diet is going to support your gut. You need those neurotransmitters. I can't even tell you how essential. When I am working one-to-one with people in our brain behavior reset program, and I'm doing those brain maps, and again, this is not a typical thing, but I can see based on the patterning somebody's gut health. It is almost rare that somebody has great gut health. And if you're interested in a brain map, you can go to drroseann.com/help. And that will walk you through that process. So, and of course, anti-inflammatory diet is just, you're going to be healthier, right? In general, you're, as we talked about for the neurodivergent child, you're going to have better attention. You're going to have better mood. You're going to have better processing, right? That alertness will be there, right? And as I always say, like if you had a Cinnabon or you had eggs and bacon, you're going to have a very different feeling starting your day, right? We are one of the only countries that have like desserts for breakfast. So that actually started with Kellogg, just so you know. And it was more granola based. If you ever watch Food Wars, it's great. So we talked about some of the anti-inflammatory basics, but again, it really is about putting in more nutrient dense food. And what I always talk about, a calm brain diet, a diet that's self-regulation and really promoting self-regulation. And remember, next month, all self-regulation. We're going to be diving like crazy into self-regulation. I can't even wait for it. You've asked for it and I'm giving it to you, and it's going to be good. But it needs nourishment for that nervous system to get into a parasympathetic state. If we're eating garbage, how can we perform better, right? Like of course I have a car that's fast and I have to have premium gas. Like if I put junk gas in my car, it's not going to operate. I don't get my brakes done. It's not going to work well, right? For sure. So somebody's asking, can magnesium improve gut health? Absolutely. So now, I made magnesium because it's the number one nutrient that we need. There's so many things that within our body, so many systems, so many processes. There's a minimum of 300. There require magnesium to function properly, but they estimate that about 600 chemical processes at some point need magnesium. And our magnesium, or all of our elementals or minerals, do support our whole body working better. And when we have and yes, it supports gut health, and it does that. And when we give the body what it needs and it helps support those neurotransmitters, then our brain's going to work better. And there are, again, many forms of magnesium. Mine has the glycinate and the L-threonate, which are not typical because they're so expensive and because it's like so powerful. So I like to think of our magnesium as like, the Bentley of magnesiums. That's what I think. I want you to know about it, and people really love it, and I'm really proud of it. It's great. So let's talk about, the parent tips for how to get your kids who are picky eaters, which I think are the norm. So I don't want you to feel bad. And please know that, as I said, anti-inflammatory basics, right? You start where you start. right? So I look at it in two ways. Are you going to walk into the pool down the steps gently, or are you going to jump in to the deep end? And I would say that I rarely get somebody who wants to jump into the deep end. And sometimes I have people who want to just jump in and they're not ready for it. And you do what you can and you're going to meet your kid where they're at. But you have to have patience and recognize it's a process and you have to stick with it. I think the greatest mistake that I see in parenting in general is giving up, right? Like it has to be like 30 days. Like we're doing self-regulation for an entire month because I want you to get it in your head that it's going to take time, right? Just like the lady who came out here today, it's 3 months later and, she's like, it's dramatic, right? Well, 3 months is not really a long time, especially when they had been working on this for a few years. But there were so many little things that all work together, right? But what are some things that are really helpful that I see, right? And there's way more in my book. It's going to be okay. But number one, I think you have to work on sensory needs. So I see kids being sensory defensive a lot with food. So it's not the food itself, it's the way the food feels. So there are lots of sensory techniques. It's actually called a sensory diet, which is confusing, but a sensory diet is like a prescriptive set of sensory activities that help the nervous system modulate. You can go to an occupational therapist to help your system regulate, but there also are a lot of hacks. So is your child a deep pressure craver, right? Do they want hugs? One of the things that we did with Max when he really was struggling with PANS, and he was a great baby, like ate calamari and octopus and steak and bizarre egg sandwiches and all kinds of just super nutrient dense food. And then when he got PANS, he literally stopped eating. I couldn't even get him to take a cookie or anything. I was desperate. Like there were sometimes he would have frosting and I was like, oh my God, he needs something. And he would drink different types of milk, like nut milks and stuff like that. It's kind of how we survived. But when you are sensory, one of the things that worked for him was actually to take an electric toothbrush and take the backside of a toothbrush and rub it along his cheeks to desensitize his mouth. We also found that if I was having him do sensory activities, like I said, hugs and different types. There was a whole bunch of activities we would do that I could get him to eat while he was doing it and right after. And so we sort of retrained him. Now, he was extreme, and many of you are extremes. Like this happens a lot with the autistics. This happens a lot with, kids with ADHD. And this definitely happens with kids with anxiety, depression, OCD, all those other things. So you want to think about meeting their sensory needs and desensitizing them. Certainly lowering anxiety helps you to eat better. I mean, that is just always. I've never had a kid who was an extreme, like they had ARFID or resistant, who when they were in our program didn't improve. Now, some of them are so extreme that they still were in an abnormal range, but I might have gotten them from 5 foods to 25 foods, which sounds terrible, but like for that parent, they felt like they won lotto because they had done, the one particular case, like they had gone to the famous lady in Connecticut where she comes to your house and retrains you. That didn't work for him. And actually he might've went from liquids to solids and maybe that's what happened, but they felt like they had tried a lot. And what happened is we relaxed his nervous system and he became more open. Right. So number 2, don't give up. Right. I think a lot of times we say, well, these are the 5 foods and, that's it. They're not going to eat anything else. So retraining is a process. And I've seen research as little as like it takes 14, 30 times to be reintroduced or introduced the first time a food before they'll accept it. That's a lot. So we do sort of give up, right? And then 3, eat the same foods with your kids, right? So like, don't give your kids a special meal. Don't you do a different meal. try what you can to eat the same foods. I'm not saying it's chicken nuggets for all of you. And if it is chicken nuggets, I've gotten some of my people to make their own, right? Where they're making it together. And my biggest favorite tip that I think nobody talks enough about is cooking with your kids, right? So like when it was hell, guys, and his pans hell, I made him make the food with me. And he always tried the food. And I would say that more than 50% of the time, if not more, he would eat the food that he made, and we made it a fun thing. Now, I even do this with teenagers. So, this isn't just a young kid thing, even though when we were at our worst parts, it was like when Max was 3 and 7 and 8, somewhere in there. So it's easier in some ways, but it's also harder because there's no rationalization. But you have to stay with it and you have to try. Now, again, when you're eating more nutrient dense foods, you're going to retrain the brain and body to eat more. So I don't feel like I talk enough about how to help kids eat. And I know it's hard. The Hodge is like gluten free and dairy free. And, we're the ones that show up at the parties with our own cupcakes and stuff like that. The great news is, like, depending on where you live in the world, this is much more open. And I can promise you, it feels like you didn't win when you change your diet. And here are the questions. Did you do it long enough? Did you put the right nutrient dense food in? If your kid's reactive to dairy or gluten, you don't get to have it in moderation. It doesn't work like that. And people will say, well, I get to have a little here and there. No. Dr. Roseann has dairy. I'm literally going to get an ear infection, and I might be sick for a week. So for me, it's easy because I have the pain points. I'm grateful for being sick, right? I certainly don't want that for other kids. But start thinking about it, stick with it, and always work to regulate the nervous system. When you regulate the nervous system, whether you're doing things like COMPMF, you're doing breath work. I had a mom recently tell me, like, they were in our one-to-one program and the child just hated the breath work. And we did it. They came here. They were here in person for like a week and we did it. And she said, as much as he hated it, she said, you know what happened? I was like, what? And she said that when he was home, when he would get angry, he started doing it. And I said, his subconscious went back to what worked. And I just said, thank you for sharing that. Cause I know what it's like when your kid is a hot mess, and whether they're, overreactive or underreactive, it's hard. And so sticking with the strategies when it works, your child, and you're reinforcing the coping skills, it's going to help. And diet has its place. So even if you're just doing swap outs and it's 25%, that means your kid's brain is going to work 25% better. So be kind to yourself, get started. I hope this was helpful for you. If you're watching us live, please, we're monitoring the chat. So, ask away, share your successes about how a diet is helping you. And if you're listening to this podcast, please leave a review. I get so many positive reviews and people send me such beautiful messages on Instagram and Messenger. And thank you, because, I know it's hard. So from one mother to another, or a parent who's has a child who's struggling, just know it's going to be okay. And I hope changes in your diet feel more attainable for you today.